Good evening. Good evening. I hope you all had a chance to get to the Montana Historical Society. It was a wonderful reception. I think one of the more intriguing, stunning aspects of it is that I heard the delegates still debating. It's true. It's true. There were some pretty rousing arguments going on there over the Constitution up on the second floor. So I just wanted to share that with you. It's been a very good day here at We the People. Conversations on the Montana and U.S. Constitutions. I hope, and I think most of you were able to attend the conversations earlier today. Very lively, wide-ranging, thoughtful, funny, terrific stuff. And tonight is going to continue that trend, fortunately, for all of us. The topic for tonight is going to be representative government and free enterprise. What were the founders thinking? Which I kind of like. That's kind of one of those interesting, almost puzzling titles. So we'll have a lot of fun with that. Our moderator for tonight is Patricia Cotter. Patricia serves on the Montana Supreme Court. She was first elected in 2000, re-elected in 2008. She had a law firm in Great Falls prior to becoming a member of the Supreme Court, and that was with her husband. And understandably enough, it was called Cotter and Cotter. Good name for their law firm. In any case, Patricia has very, very graciously agreed to moderate tonight's conversation, and she will introduce our participants. Please welcome our panel.
Welcome to our conversation for this evening. The two men that are with me here are going to engage in a lively discussion. They have mutual respect for each other, but disagree on many things that you might expect. What we plan on doing this evening is I'm going to give each of them, first of all, I'm going to read their biographies, and then I'm going to give each of them 5 minutes or so for an opening question. And after that, well, I'll ask some questions and we'll switch off and go back and forth, and each will have equal input. I'm not going to put a stopwatch on either of them. They've pledged to do 2 or 3 minutes per answer, and I'm sure that's going to work out just fine. After about 40 minutes of exchange, then we'll open the floor to questions. So first, I want to introduce both of our speakers and read their biographies. Carl Graham. Carl was born in Glasgow, graduated from Montana State University, and is a 20-year Navy veteran. He has a master's degree in national security affairs and is presently an adjunct professor of aviation science. Carl was recently appointed to the Montana State Advisory Committee for the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. Carl is the CEO of Montana Policy Institute, which is headquartered in Bozeman. The Institute is a nonpartisan research center and a self-described free market institute whose objective is to attain a more sound economic policy in our state and nation. The key objective is to establish a more sophisticated level of political and economic understanding among citizens and decision makers. The Institute espouses the principles of the American Revolution: individual liberty, limited government, the free market, and the rule of law. On my left is Brian Kahn, who lives here in Helena. He has worked as a ranch hand, a college boxing coach, a conservationist, a lawyer, and a journalist. Brian is the host of the award-winning public radio program Home Ground and is the author of the acclaimed 2011 book, Real Common Sense: Using Our Founding Values to Reclaim Our Nation and Stop the Radical Right from Hijacking America. Brian also provided typing services to his dog Tess of Helena for her book, Training People How to Bring Out the Best in Your Human. The book has been widely praised by dogs, but panned by cats. So I want to start this evening with the question posed in the program. Give us an overview, each of you. What were the founders thinking about the role of representative government vis-a-vis free enterprise? Brian, you begin first.
Carl and I have agreed that we're going to start up here for our opening remarks, and then we'll do the rest sitting side by side. Ken Egan neglected to mention that he selected Justice Cotter as moderator to ensure that any breach of the rules is treated as a felony. And since she's on the Supreme Court, appeal is futile. I want to thank Carl Graham, not just for being here tonight, but for his 20-year service to the United States of America in the Navy. A book that is highly relevant to this conference, and if you do nothing else but accept my tip to read it, you'll have done wisely. Washington A Life by Ron Chernow. You read this book, you will get an understanding of an extraordinary, not saintly, but extraordinary heroic figure in America, an indispensable figure. The founders wrote and argued a lot about a lot of things. At two critical points, they boiled it down. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And then the preamble to the Constitution with George Washington sitting in the chair it was adopted. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. These central principles can unite us in these deeply troubled times. We face profound economic problems on a global scale, and as citizens, need to determine what we want the representative government bequeathed to us by the founders to do about it. Some of the problems. About 100 million Americans, 1/3 of us, live on less than $42,000 a year for a family of 4. 40 to 50 million Americans have no health insurance, causing 18,000 unnecessary deaths a year. In the last decade, we've lost more than 5 million jobs to overseas manufacturing. Since 1980, the gross domestic product of this country, 1980 to 2010, almost tripled, $5 to $14.7 trillion. And non-farm worker productivity went up 88%. Yet the average male worker is making less and working 100 hours more a year. The top 1% of Americans own more wealth than the bottom 90%, as in the 1920s. In 2009, the top 25 hedge fund managers averaged $1 billion each. If you make $50,000 a year, it takes you 20,000 years to make $1 billion. Front page New York Times business section. April Fool's Day, 2010. But it was not an April Fool's headline. There are more honor students in China than we have students. Some argue that representative government does not have the constitutional or moral right to try to address these issues by regulating private enterprise, like having higher taxes for corporations that export American jobs. For example, the Tea Party Patriots' 2010 core values statement, quote, "The founders believed that personal and economic freedom were indivisible, as do we, ... Therefore, we support a return to the free market principles on which this nation was founded and oppose government intervention in the operations of private business." In short, that point of view says that private enterprise, the rights of private enterprise are absolute, superseding all constitutional rights and the preamble's charge to promote the general welfare. So let's eliminate all business regulation. The banning of child labor, arsenic emissions from factories, mine safety rules, mandatory testing of pharmaceutical drugs, speed limits for trucks, minimum wage, all that. But all that aside, the history is false. The founders believed that people had a natural right to earn a living and to do that through private enterprise, from owning land for farming, overwhelmingly the source of support at that time, to manufacturing, to importing overseas goods. But from the outset, they recognized limits to rights of private enterprise. When business conflicted with important public interests, they were perfectly willing to intervene. At the Constitutional Convention, founders proposed to outlaw the most profitable private enterprise in the nation, the buying, selling, and forced labor of human slaves. That proposal doomed passage of the Constitution. It was set aside for 81 years, and then done. George Washington's first inaugural in 1790 listed the production of domestic industry as a key governmental goal. Congress imposed taxes on imports. hurting importing businesses and helping domestic ones. In 1791, a tax was imposed on whiskey distillers, harming their business. That caused the Whiskey Rebellion, and in 1794, George Washington, as President Commander-in-Chief, personally got on his horse and led 13,000 troops into western Pennsylvania to put down the insurrection. Clearly, the founders believed that when private enterprise conflicted with the national interest must prevail. Does anybody here disagree with that principle? The founders understood that all human beings have unalienable rights. They also understood we are flawed, that I tend to be more interested in my rights than those of the rest of you in this room, and that all concentrated governmental and economic power enables the abuse of others' rights. Third, sometimes people's rights conflict. My freedom of speech to shout fire in a crowded theater and the rest of the audience's right to public safety, or my right to run my restaurant as I choose, serving who I choose, and an African American family's right to justice, to eat their meal there. And finally, they understood that the best guarantee of liberty and justice for all was a national representative government limited in its overall powers by the Bill of Rights. George Washington said, quote, "The Constitution can only lay the foundation. The community at large must raise the edifice." That's our system, and it depends more than ever on an informed citizenry that is committed to its dual commitment to liberty and justice, to private rights and the general welfare, and alert to the dangers of excessive public or private power. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Carl, your turn to tell us what you think the founders were.
If I can do it without impacting my time, I'd like to thank Justice Cotter and Brian as well. This has been an interesting road for me, and we've had some great conversations leading up to this, so it's been very beneficial, and I've really enjoyed it. So I look forward to the dialogue, and I actually agree with probably about 70% of what you said, and the other 30% we'll have some fun with. What did the founders think? That's where I'm going to focus here on the brief time I have to start anyway. You won't find free enterprise enshrined in any of the founding documents. The Declaration of Independence, the description of the course of human events, it doesn't directly refer to any economic system. Of course, the Intolerable Acts talk about some economic impacts, but they don't talk about an economic system per se. The Constitution, in order to form a more perfect union, certainly doesn't refer to a more perfect economy or a more perfect economic union. It talks about political and governmental structure. But the founders were focused on rights and the interaction of those rights within a society. And I think that does have implications, or you can draw parallels. We certainly can't escape the similarities between their descriptions of and the structure of a free society and contemporary descriptions and elements of what we now call free enterprise or capitalist economic system. They're based on similar underlying principles and beliefs. The exercise of liberty, certainly the role of responsibility in the exercise of that liberty. There's also a recognition of human nature, as Brian alluded to, and of natural rights, play very highly. In fact, they incorporate human nature and they incorporate these natural rights to a better end, rather than looking at them and trying to account for them and the harm that they might do, as previous systems have done. And in fact, I think that's the revolutionary concept